Hello, in this video I'm going to take you through a basic retouching workflow and introduce you to a few of Photoshop's best tools for removing marks and tidying up images. We're going to make each edit on a separate layer for maximum control, so you can see here I have my layers panel open. You can find that under Window, Layers, and to preserve your background layer you'd usually duplicate it. You can do that by dragging it to the create new layer icon here at the bottom, but instead I'm going to simply click the create new layer icon to give me a new empty layer above the background, and I can use a tool on this layer while sampling from the pixels on the background layer below. And this means I can preserve all of the information in my original image, so I can go back to it if I need to. Next I'm going to grab the spot removal tool from the tools panel over here. So you can see my spot removal tool is here. If you can't see it, you just need to click and hold your mouse down over this section in the tools panel, and then you can choose it from the list here of healing tools. So I'm going to choose the spot healing brush tool, and you can see in the options here I have content aware checked, and also most importantly sample all layers, and this means I can sample from the pixels on my background layer while painting on my layer 1 here. Now before I start painting I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Command or Control and plus. You can see how that allows me to zoom in. That's Command plus on a Mac, Control and plus on a PC. Command or Control and minus will allow me to zoom out, and I can hold the space bar to drag around the image like that. So let's zoom in close to the face here. And another really useful keyboard shortcut is the left and right square bracket keys, which are usually on your keyboard next to the enter key or return key. And I can use those to resize my brush tip. So the right square bracket key will make my brush tip larger, the left square bracket key will make my brush tip smaller. So you usually want to be using a fairly small brush when using the spot removal tool, because you want the brush to be just slightly larger than the area that you want to fix. So you can see we have a few marks around the forehead here, and I can paint over these marks with the spot healing brush tool, and the tool is very clever. It will work out what you want to remove by analysing the surrounding pixels and get rid of the mark. So you can see how we can very quickly remove some of these marks and spots on the forehead, and even some of these lines by dragging a line like this. And if I toggle that layer on or off, you can see how all of these different edits we're making are on this layer 1 here. We still have all of the original information below on our background layer. And if I click the eye icon next to my background layer instead, we can hide it and you can see the areas that we painted. So I'm going to have a look at the hair now. So I'm going to use the spacebar. If I hold that down and then drag, I can move around my image, and then I can paint again with the spot removal tool, and you'll see how we can get rid of some of these stray hairs. And the tool isn't perfect. It will occasionally slip up. It's not a miracle worker, but it does do a very good job of analysing what you want to remove and then replacing it with the right information. So I'm going to pause the video while I continue working around the hair, and I'll come back to you when I'm done. Okay, so here you can see if I toggle my top layer on or off how we've managed to get rid of some of that hair that's particularly bad. And if I just toggle my background layer off, you can see those are all of the areas that I've painted over with the spot healing tool. And before we go any further, let's just double click the layer name here and call this layer spot healing, because I'm going to add a second new empty layer, and I'm going to use this layer for cloning. So I'm going to grab the clone tool from the tools panel over here, and I'm going to set my opacity to about 20% on the clone tool, and I'm also going to make sure sample all layers is set up here, and that means again I can paint on this empty layer while sampling from my spot healing layer and my background layer below. So I'm going to zoom in closer to the eyes by using Command or Control and plus again, and then I'm going to just hold Alt, and you'll see how that gives me a target icon. So I'm going to target the cheek here below the eye. So I'm just going to hold Alt and click on this area, and then I'm just going to resize my brush tip slightly smaller, and then I'm going to use this area to clone in to smooth out this area here under the eye. So I'm just going to drag up across that area, and you can see how we can smooth those tones, and because we're using the clone tool at an opacity of 20%, we can blend in the tones quite nicely. And if we go to the other eye and again hold Alt and sample an area directly below on the cheek here below the area that we want to fix, and then I can paint to blend in those tones like that. And if I toggle that cloning layer on or off, you can see that's with it off and that's with it on. But the great thing about applying all of these edits on different layers is that I can change the layer however I like by using the opacity slider here. So I can lower the strength by dragging the opacity down to about 60%. And this is particularly useful when retouching portraits, because you always want to keep things quite subtle, so it's a good way of reining in any effects just by lowering the layer opacity. If I toggle the layer on or off again, you can see how it's an improvement, but it's very subtle. Next, I'm going to move on and make the eyes a little bit more punchy by using an adjustment layer. So I'm going to click the Create Adjustment Layer icon here at the bottom of the Layers panel, and this gives me a set of options here. I'm going to choose Curves, and then I can make changes using the curve line here. If I drag it upwards, that will lighten the image. If I drag downwards, it will darken the image. And this adjustment layer is going to affect all the layers below it in the layer stack here, so it's affecting my 3 layers that we made. So I'm going to drag upwards on the curve line to lighten the image first of all, and then I'm just going to hide my properties panel here because we want to see the eyes. And I want this adjustment only to affect the area here over the eyes, and I can do that by inverting the layer mask thumbnail here to black. Currently the layer mask thumbnail is white, and that means that everything on that adjustment layer is visible. But if I hit Command or Control and I, that's Command and I on a Mac, Control and I on a PC, that will invert the layer mask to black, which means that adjustment layer effect is completely hidden. I can then paint while this layer mask is active here to reveal the effect selectively over the image. So I'm going to grab the brush tool with white as my foreground color, and I'm going to choose a soft edged brush tip from the brush preset picker, and I can just resize my brush tip using the square bracket keys on my keyboard again. And with opacity at 100%, I'm just going to paint over the eyes, and you can see how that reveals that brightening effect, just like that. But the great thing about using an adjustment layer is the effect can be changed whenever we like. So I can double click the icon here to bring back my curves settings, and then if I like, I can just drag down on the curve slightly to make the brightening slightly less intense. Perhaps I can make a second point on my curve line to boost the contrast, so the brighter tones are getting lighter and we're preserving the mid-tones by setting these points down here. And I can also control the strength of the effect again by using the opacity slider here. So let's just turn off my properties panel. I can check how the layer is affecting my image by toggling the eye icon on or off, and then if I think it's too strong, I can just lower the layer opacity, so bring it back down to about 70%, I think. And then I'm going to add another curves adjustment layer, and I'm going to use this to concentrate on the iris just to boost the tone. So I'm going to make an S-shaped curve by dragging one point down there in the shadows and a second point up here in the highlights, somewhere around there. And again, hit Command or Control and I to invert the layer mask to full black and hide the effect. I can then once more use the brush tool and paint with white to reveal it just over the iris like that. And again, the effect is too strong, so I can lower the layer opacity to soften it somewhere around about 50%, and I think that's working well. So that's how you can use adjustment layers to selectively change parts of your image. Now I'm going to move on to the skin, and I want to soften the skin, so I'm going to use a technique called high pass skin softening. To do this, I need to create a merged copy of all of my different layers here. I can do this with a keyboard shortcut, which is Command or Control, Shift and Alt and E, and that creates a merged copy there. I'm just going to call it merged. And let's just zoom out slightly with Command or Control and minus. Then I'm going to go to the blend mode options here at the top of the layers panel and change the blend mode of this merged layer from normal to overlay. And that will give me a boost in contrast that looks quite garish at the moment, but we'll fix that in a second by going to Filter, Other, High Pass. And I'm going to set radius to about 9 pixels. And then hit OK, And you can see how this gives my image a sharpening effect if I toggle that layer on or off. So you can also use the high pass filter for sharpening in this way, but I'm going to use it for softening by hitting Command or Control and I, and that will invert the tones on this layer in much the same way as we inverted a layer mask from white to black. I can hit Command or Control and I to invert my merged layer, and you can see how that creates a nice softening effect. But I only want to apply this effect to the areas of skin. And I can do this again by using a layer mask. So I want to add a full layer mask and then paint with white in much the same way as we did with our two adjustment layers. I can click here at the bottom of the layers panel to add an empty layer mask, but if I hold Alt and click here, that will add a full layer mask that's full black. So you can see how that overlay layer there is completely hidden. And we can then again paint with white to reveal that effect selectively just in the areas that we want. So making sure that the layer mask thumbnail here is highlighted, I'm going to grab the brush tool and again use white and simply paint over the skin to reveal the softening effect. And I'm being careful not to paint over any areas of detail like the lips and the eyes. And if we zoom in slightly closer, I can toggle the layer on or off and you can see how we're applying a nice softening effect to the skin. I think perhaps it's slightly too strong again, but once more we can simply lower the layer opacity to make it a little more subtle. I think we'll bring it back down to about 62%. And that's my finished retouched portrait. If I just hold Alt and click on the eye icon here, you can see that's my original image, and that's my image after a few subtle enhancements. If I just go back through my layers here, you can see how first of all we use the spot healing tool to remove some marks around the face and tidy up the hair. We then use the clone tool to soften those areas around the eyes before boosting the whites of the eyes and also boosting contrast in the iris, and finally applying some skin smoothing with a high pass layer inverted and set to the blend mode overlay. You can hit Command or Control 0 to go back up to full screen, and that's our finished retouched portrait. All that's left to do is to save it. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, and we can choose to save our file as a PSD, and that will keep all of our layers intact. But if we want, we can also choose to save it as a JPEG, which will save a flattened version, which we can use to post on the web or for any other things like that. So I'm going to choose Save As again, and this time choose JPEG, and perhaps we could call it girl_retouched. And that's it. Thanks for watching.